Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this webinar to give you an introduction to the exciting new NCS project. My name is Tom Allen-Stevens. I lead the British On-Farm Innovation Network, and we are one of no less than 17 consortium partners on this project, spanning research as well as commercial interests. And thank you for joining Pulsepep, farmers working with scientists to achieve the best from pulse crops and reduce their carbon emissions. We now have more than 250 people who have joined this community, and you'll hear more about it in this webinar. Now, I'm just going to share my screen if the technology works. Hopefully you can all see this. Now, here you will see the partners involved in the project, and it's funded by DEFRA Farming Futures R&D Fund, delivered by Innovate UK. Now, more on this later, but first, let me give you a glimpse of our summer of discovery, what we're up to this summer, and where you can find out more. So first of all, many thanks to those who visited us at Cereals on the PGRO stand and met either Sky, our community manager, or myself. We had some really good conversations about how to shape the NCS project and other projects that we're involved with. So we'll also be at the Royal Highland Show next week on the 23rd of June. We'll be in the SRUC marquee, so look forward to seeing our Scottish members there. And we'll be at Groundswell on both days. So look for us. Look out for more on the NCS project on the MacArthur Agriculture stand. And we'll also be on the Base UK stand, where you'll be able to find out more about Boffin's projects looking into arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi and harvest weed seed control. And we'll be on the Small Robot Company stand, and there's more details to come on those. But for those who aren't Boffin members, you can find out more at this web address, www.boffin.org.uk. But look out for another ambitious and very exciting large project that we plan to launch at Groundswell, Slimers. So this is another industry consortium, this time led by Boffin. We brought together some really defining research projects at the cutting edge of technology to redefine how we manage slugs. This £2.6 million project is again funded by DEFRA and delivered by Innovate UK. So really great opportunities to get involved in this one and to be paid to carry out on-farm trials. And look out for the webinar that we've planned for 15th of August. So to move on to today's webinar, I'm shortly going to hand over to Roger Vickers from PGRO, who leads in the NCS project. And then we have Pete Ionetta, who will give a window on the science. Now, Pete can't join us in person, so we have a video from him that we'll be delivering. Then we'll be moving on to John MacArthur from MacArthur Agriculture, who'll be looking at opportunities for livestock rations. Then we'll be moving to Pete Berry from ADAS, who's going to talk about Pulsepep, this vibrant community of farmers and scientists. Then we'll be, hang on a second, apologies for that. Then we'll be moving on to Liz Bowles from the Farm Carbon Toolkit, who will be telling us more about the carbon baseline and how we'll be recording that throughout the project. And then we're very pleased to be joined by David Passmore, a farmer in Oxfordshire, and also Andy Howard, farmer in Kent, who have been leading the way in where pulse crops are going and where we can do more. We'll be sharing their experiences on those crops. Now, we then want to move into breakout rooms. Now, this will be shortly after 3 o'clock. And what we'll be doing is you'll have to sign out of the webinar and we'll give you an address to sign back in again on a different Zoom address so that we can then move into breakout rooms and discuss the pulses of brilliance, how we're going to take this project forward. As I say, it's very much farmer-led, so it's up to you how we then take it forward, and specifically the trials that we'll be doing and some of the knowledge exchange gaps that we'll be looking to fill. I'll then close off the session shortly before 3:30 to give some feedback, but we'll be following up from this And the important thing here is that you'll see at the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A and a chat button. Please use those to put in your thoughts, your questions about this particular project, any comments that you've got, any experiences that you'd like to share. Those will all be captured. We will try to address those through the webinar, but there's an awful lot of you here on this call, and I don't think we'll be able to address all of them, but we will capture them all, and they will all be fed into our project planning as we take the project forward. As I say, this is very much a farmer-led project, and so we are looking for your views on where to take this. So please do use the Q&A box and the chat button below, and we will capture all of those. We'll try and come back to you if you've got specific questions, but it might not be addressed during this webinar. I'm just going to say a couple of brief words about the farmer involvement that I've already mentioned. We're looking for 200 farmers to get involved. And again, as I say, thank you very much to all those farmers who have signed up on the Pulsepep. You will be given the opportunity to establish your carbon baseline. And Liz is going to say a bit more about that when we talk about the Farm Carbon Toolkit later. Within that, we'll also be looking for about 40 to 50 farmers to be involved in on-farm trials. And now this, the important part of this project is that it will be farmers themselves who will be driving this, farmers who will be delivering the outcomes of the project. And those people who are doing on-farm trials will be paid for their involvement. They'll be paid as subcontractors within the project. So there's great opportunities to be involved in that. And we'll be working with scientists to make sure that we get protocols that are scientifically valid, give some really good, robust evidence, but they're practical enough to be managed and established on farm. So the other aspect to acknowledge here is that the data that you provide to us, that data will be protected. And that's both in terms of your own farm details, your address and so on, and also the data that you put into the project. We will be delivering more information about how this data will be protected for those people who are joining the Pulsepep. But we will be following the latest industry guidelines as far as that's concerned. One thing to make you sure about is that this NCS project is a separate entity. So we have a lot of industry partners involved within this project. We won't be cross-selling, if you like. Your details will be protected. If you want to opt in to what other of the partners are doing, that's obviously up to you, but we won't be bombarding you information from the other project partners without your say-so. That's one of the important things. The other aspect is that any of the data that you provide into the project will be protected, and we will be giving more details about that as we go through. Let me hand over now to Roger. Roger, if you'd like to share your screen, yes, I can already see you there, Roger. If you'd like to tell us more, Roger.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. Tom, can you see the screen share or not? Yep.
No, that's come up. Just need to start your presentation.
Okay, thank you. Well, firstly, any apologies to anyone who I've spoken to in the last week or specifically the last couple of days, because what you might be about to hear in the following 5 slides is perhaps what you've already heard from me previously. But this really is just an overview, very high-level overview, introducing the project. So you can see that the NCS logo there stands for Nitrogen Climate Smart, which is an abbreviation of the rather longer project title, which is Nitrogen Efficient Plants for Climate Smart Arable Cropping Systems. And you can obviously tell that needed to be shortened to make it manageable. There's a very strong consortium of active established players within the arable and livestock supply chains. who are partners in the project with a really solid track record of working together. And the purpose is to research transformational farming systems to meet the net zero targets and establish new climate resilient agricultural practices. There are two key elements to the project: crop rotation system using pulses to reduce nitrogen fertilizer use, and the validation of pulse crops as a nutritious livestock feed to replace soya imports. The aim is to prove that through real farm data and experimental research, the farming sector can be transformed from the perspective of productivity, profitability, sustainability, and resilience, whilst at the same time significantly reducing greenhouse gas emissions in pursuit of net zero targets. Tom has already mentioned there will be extensive farmer engagement in research from the very start. It's a real cornerstone of the project, and it's hoped that this will accelerate dissemination and uptake throughout the industry. Delivery of the solutions identified will be facilitated through the Farm Carbon Toolkit that enables farmers to manage and monitor emissions and environmental mitigation strategies. The size of the challenge is enormous. The Department for Business, Energy and Industry strategy reports in 2021 outlined how the UK is responsible for approximately 424 million tonnes per annum of greenhouse gas emissions. DEFRA's own agri-climate report of 2021 attributed 46.3 million tonnes per annum to agriculture. That's more than 10%. They identified in that same report a maximum reduction potential of 2.8 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalents. And the hypothesis behind this project recognises that energy use in fertiliser production is a significant source of greenhouse gas emissions in arable rotations, and that soya importation for animal feed is significantly associated with considerable land use change and also creates an enormous carbon footprint. Pulse crops don't require nitrogen fertiliser as they biologically fix their own, yet pulse crops are significantly underutilised, being less than 5% of the UK arable crop area. Where pulse crops such as fava beans optimise to a 1 in 5 rotation, the resulting produce used to replace soya in livestock diets, it's estimated that 1.5 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalents could be removed from UK agriculture. This is over 50% of the maximum potential reduction that is estimated by DEFRA. The project is designed with 7 work packages, and this slide illustrates their connections. Work package 2 is led by ADAS and will evaluate the nitrogen use efficiencies and carbon emissions in arable rotations and the production of fava beans. Work package 4, led by MacArthur Agriculture, will evaluate the use and efficiency of beans in animal feeds and livestock systems, focusing on dairy, other ruminants and poultry. Experimental pig studies aren't being included as the Green Pig project, which concluded some years ago, already proved the concept in that sector. Work package 3 is led by PGRO and is the experimental platform, and this will focus on nitrogen use efficiency and emissions in long-term rotational studies at the Balrudry farm managed by James Hutton Institute and at Cranfield University using the CHAP facility for plant phenotyping and soil health for controlled environmental evaluations of production crop emissions. Work package 5 is going to focus on environmental cost-benefit analysis and a feasibility report on the exploitation process and end uses, and a policy brief to inform DEFRA. And data from work packages 2, 3, 4 and 5 will be collated to feed work package 1, led by the James Hutton Institute, where an attributional life cycle analysis will be developed. And along with the Farm Carbon Toolkit will enable farmers to evaluate their own enterprises and manage change with a view to optimising their nitrogen use efficiency, business activities and their environmental goals. Work package 6 will be led by Tom at Boffin and will focus on the community engagement, dissemination, and knowledge exchange. And efforts will focus heavily on farmer engagement at the heart of the project and the wider promotion of project progress, outcomes, and developments to the innovation community, those most receptive to new ideas and change. The key output for farmers is the Farm Carbon Toolkit. It will be fueled by real farm and experimental data delivered through the life cycle assessment, and the Farm Carbon Toolkit will be free to access, enabling farmers to manage their carbon footprint and optimize nitrogen use efficiencies. In turn, this will identify operational efficiencies and environmental impact, and it will enable systems change for increased sustainability and, importantly, profitability. In summary, we're aiming to prove a simple premise that by increasing pulse crop production, the harmful emissions created by nitrogen production and the importation and use of soya as an animal feed can significantly be reduced, reducing the carbon emissions attributed to UK agriculture by over 50% of the total potential reduction identified by DEFRA. The results of the project will confirm the best approach to production in different situations, providing guidance for the adoption of optimal production techniques for both economic output and the minimisation of greenhouse gas emissions from production activities. Identifying in the process a significant route to progress net zero, a significant route to progress to net zero, innovation, sustainability, resilience and productivity and profitability, all of which are major direct benefits to farmers in the UK and governmental goals. So just a very simple summary, really, and I guarantee that my colleagues are going to have some much more interesting detail to ladle over the top of that in the coming slides. Thank you.
Oh, that's brilliant, Roger. Thank you very much for that introduction. Now we'll move straight on to Pete Iannetta. Now, as I say, Pete can't be with us. I think he's gone to some fancy conference in the Azores, strangely enough. So not that we're jealous or anything. But let me just bear with me while I get the technology to work, and we have a video that he has put together for us. So. Let's, guys, hang on a second. Many apologies. It looks as though we haven't got any audio on Pete's slides. What we will do is put this, make this video available along with the video from the rest of the project. Make that available to you afterwards to download. So we'll make sure that it is actually working properly. Many apologies for not having this video now, but I think it's probably best if we move straight on to the rest of the schedule for this afternoon. And again, many apologies for that, but we will make sure that you get this video. There will be a link, by the way, after the webinar, so that you can download the webinar video itself, and we'll also make sure that you can download the video for Pete within that. So again, apologies, but we will move straight on now to John. I can see you've joined us there. If you like to unmute yourself. Hang on a second, I need to stop sharing. Bear with me, there we go. Great, yes, take it away, John.
Hi there, Tom. Hi there, everyone. Right, let me just get this screen up and going. Bear with me. Right, so Tom, can you see that now? Excellent, I've got a thumbs up. Right, so what I would like to talk about is talk about our work on work package 4. So we're looking at the wider adoption of legumes and pulses in livestock rations. As Roger said, there's kind of very much two parts to this project. One is the increase in the level of production of pulses, but when we have those pulses in production, what are we doing with them? And the huge volume livestock feed is the most logical market for that to go, just because of the sheer scale. So giving you a little bit of the context, the project A is looking to reduce kind of imported soybean meal quantities by around about 50% with homegrown protein, which is a very ambitious target. If it was achieved, it would reduce annual CO2 equivalent emissions by 0.7 million tonnes annually for UK agriculture, which is actually 25% of that maximum potential reduction that was identified by the DEFRA climate report in 2021. Additionally, we would create a more sustainable and resilient value chain for protein as we reduce our reliance on imported South American soybean meal. And I know for many people, the actual focus on carbon seems quite narrow. We know there's a lot of additional benefits to increasing kind of pulse production, not least biodiversity and in terms of soil improvement. But the focus is on the carbon in this project. So what we want to do is we want to, as part of our work package, undertake the research required to provide the know-how, the guidance, and the confidence for farm businesses to increase the use of homegrown legumes and pulses in livestock rations. And to help and to enable this to happen, we're going to assess the impact of this change on animal performance, on carbon and carbon emissions, and also the economics, because that needs to also, we need to make this stack up so it is viable. So our broad objectives is initially to kind of do a synthesis of existing academic and academic research and industry knowledge across the areas of homegrown uses of homegrown pulses in livestock rations, substitution of soybean meal, and also value-added processes which we can put the pulses through to aid that substitution. Then to develop a series of best practices protocols for the production, harvest, preservation, processing, and feeding of homegrown legumes and pulses. So we're really actually able to take it right away from field to trough. And then to use farm-based trials to evaluate animal performance, economic viability, and carbon impact. So we're not just looking to make this work on paper. We want to see how this works in real life. And we've got 4 years of this project in which to do that work. And the second half of which these farm-based trials are going to be absolutely essential. And it's finding the right farm business and the right partners to work with is going to be really important. So really, it all boils down to the big question of what we want to understand from this project is, if we increase the homegrown legume and pulse production and we use them in livestock rations in place of imported proteins, What will be the impact on carbon emissions in the livestock sector? We anticipate a reduction. We need to quantify the reduction. What will be the economic impact on the livestock sector? What if we designed it to be economically neutral? What if we actually wanted to understand the cost of replacement? And then how can livestock rations be optimized for both carbon reduction and economic return? And this is the kind of information and data that we want to feed back into briefing documents, into government and larger kind of forums. So we've got a fantastic group of partners in our work package, a really broad spectrum of organizations within the industry. So first of all, there's ABN, who are the UK's largest producer of pig and poultry feed, independent producer. And they're doing broiler and layer farm-based trials as part of this work package. Farm Carbon Toolkit will be working with our farm-based trials to assess carbon baselines and the impact on a farming enterprise as carbon emissions with a change in the livestock feed. First Milk will be undertaking the dairy farm-based trials. Kelvin Cave will be working on the development of harvest and silage and preservation best practice around particularly whole crop and treatments. LC Beef Nutrition will be working on the farm-based beef trials, looking at young stock growing and finishing. Ourselves will be looking at farm-based roasting and dehulling technology and trying to assess what value we can add to beans to aid their inclusion in livestock rations. And finally, SIUC is a really big chunky piece of academic work as part of this work package, and they'll be focusing on the details surrounding monogastric nutrition and really working hand in glove there with ABN and ourselves on working and focusing on the dehulling and the roasting of pulses. So I think that is everything from me, Tom. So I will hand back over.
Great, thank you very much for that, John, and thank you for that really interesting insight into the livestock elements of the project. And it's important to recognise that we are very much looking for mixed farmers and livestock farmers to get involved in this. And you heard from John about the different sectors that we will be involving within this project. So moving swiftly onwards, I can see you're there already, Pete, and you've already got your slides ready to go. So I'll leave it to you.
Thanks, Tom. Afternoon, everybody. So Pulsepep, which stands for Pulse Performance and Enhancement Platform, is the name we're giving to the new web platform, which is designed to be the go-to site for anybody interested in pulse performance, whether it be farmers, agronomists, end users, scientists. And it is designed to provide a knowledge base about how to grow pulses, a forum to exchange views and share experiences. Importantly, it's all about being able to connect with relevant people and organizations. It's a place where you can find out about relevant events and register for them, and to engage with specific projects. Now, Pulsepep will be part of a larger knowledge exchange platform called the FarmPep. And if you want to register for it and sign up, then go to that website there, www.farmpep.net. And this was launched last year. It was co-designed by farmers and other members of the agricultural industry. So it's sort of designed to meet your needs. And it's designed to connect people with projects and organizations. It already has over 1,000 users and over 200 registered organizations associated with it. And the Pulsepep will follow exactly the same structure as the FarmPep. So it will have 5 main sections. It will have people, topics, initiatives, events, and resources. So I'll say a little bit about those, about how those work on FarmPep, because the Pulsepep will follow exactly the same structure. So for people, it's going to be a place where you can find relevant experts or collaborators and connect with them. Of course, you can also add your own profile so people can connect with yourselves. In terms of topics, we are planning it to be designed like a Wikipedia style summary. The content will be edited by the members of Pulsepep. And importantly, the topic summaries will be stewarded so that we can rely on the information being trustworthy and rigorously assessed. Initiatives, well, it's going to be a place where you can find out about any relevant initiatives associated with pulses. Here we've got an example of the Bean Yield Enhancement Network, but it will have all the relevant initiatives on there for you to find. Events, similarly, all the relevant events will be there at touch of a button to find. And then resources, it will be basically a library, a searchable library, so that you can find out about any relevant information about growing or using pulses. So it might be crop growing guides, it might be recordings of webinars done in the past, it might be reports, all sorts of relevant information which can be searchable and found all in one place. I think that's an important thing. There's so many sources of information out there at the moment, aren't there, that you don't know which website to go to. But what we want to do is to try and get it all into one place so that you don't need to be searching around for everything. So Pulsepep will follow that structure. It's going to be built over the next few months. In addition to the sort of things I've just described, we want to make it's as much of a community as possible, so that you've got a forum there which is easy to use. You can exchange views, you can share experiences, you can uprate information so that the sort of feed that comes into you is as relevant as possible to what you need. But we really need your help to make it as successful as possible. So we're really looking at this stage for feedback from yourselves as to what you want from a web platform like this to make you want to use it. So please do put in the chat anything that you need, and this is the perfect time because we're designing it right now, and we will try and get it in there. So thank you for listening, and yeah, I look forward to the discussion at the end.
Great, thank you very much for that, Pete. And as Pete said, a really, really important part of this project is the community that we're building around that. And this is your community, it's your opportunity. I noticed there's a question that came through from Tom Pearson earlier on about the farmer questions, and thank you very much for the questions that you put in there. It is all about answering your questions, Tom, and that goes for everyone. It's very much farmer-led, this project. It will be those people who get involved in the Pulsepep who will drive that. Now, I'm delighted to introduce Liz Bowles. Great to see you, Liz. Now, I think I'm going to be running your PowerPoint, aren't I?
Please. Thank you, Tom.
Right. Shall I get the?
Yeah, if you'd like to, please. And just in terms of one of the questions in the chat while you're doing that, Tom, somebody was asking about linkages with European projects, and I was just starting to write into the chat when Pete finished to say that some of the project partners are involved with a Horizon 2020 project called Leguminos, which has got sort of some similarity and crossover, so that's quite helpful. So I think certainly we will be, wherever possible, bringing in learnings from as far afield as we have to. Okay, thank you, Tom. Good afternoon, everybody, and it's a real delight to be here speaking to you this afternoon. And I'm just going to spend a few minutes telling you about the role of the Farm Carbon Toolkit in this project, and also a little bit about ourselves. If you'd like to move on to the next slide, please, Tom. Yeah, this is who we are. We've actually grown a bit since this photo was taken just before Christmas. So we are a small organisation. I like to think of us as an organisation of carbon farming experts, as well as being something increasingly of a software business. So we're an organisation that's a community interest company formed by farmers for farmers about 10 years ago. And we've got a team of advisors who work to support farmers to understand their carbon footprint, where their emissions come from, and how best they can change farming practice to reduce emissions and store more carbon, both in soils and non-crop biomass. And alongside that, we own one of the most popular carbon calculators used in the UK. And to help with that, we're constantly improving our calculator, because I'm sure many of you now are starting to be asked by your customers more and more about your carbon footprint. And it's becoming something which is almost something which all farmers are thinking they have to do. Next slide, please, Tom. So I'm going to just talk you through just some of the reasons why this is so important. And apologies if I'm teaching grandma to suck eggs, but I think whenever I've shared these slides, it's always been something which is of interest to people. So I'm going to do it. Next slide, please. So this really just gives you a breakdown of all the greenhouse gases from agriculture. And it's quite different to the overall national picture. And you can see that within agriculture, the predominance of methane and nitrous oxide is far greater than carbon dioxide. So effectively within agriculture, a lot of our challenge is how to reduce our emissions of nitrous oxide and methane as much as it is carbon dioxide. Now, this next stat that I've got here, I sometimes play a bit of a game when I'm talking to people, especially journalists. I ask them what proportion of the UK's total emissions do they think come from agriculture? And quite often I'll be told a number of something like 30%. In fact, it was 11% in 2020. It will go up as other sources of emissions manage to reduce those emissions. And certainly the powers that be are now starting to turn their attention to agriculture, which is why, as an industry, we now really do need to start looking at what we can do to both reduce those emissions and also to play our part in storing more carbon in soils and non-crop biomass. And I think the bit that at the Farm Carbon Toolkit we're really aware of is that managing carbon and business efficiency are so closely linked. So in many instances, changing farming practice to reduce emissions does make business sense. But clearly, and literally part of the reason why I'm not sat at my desk today is that I've been out with customers, and agriculture is one of the most complicated sectors to measure in terms of emissions. You know, you'll all know that it's so dependent on the weather, but actually it's complicated because it's a biological system. Okay, next slide, please, Tom. So what I've done here, and these are fairly typical numbers, if you like. I hope you can see them. I hope it's big enough on your screens. So what I've got here is just what, for a typical arable farm and a typical ruminant farm, where those emissions will come from. So if we look first of all on the left-hand side of the screen, look at the arable farms, you can see that more than 50% of the overall emissions, and these are emissions expressed as carbon dioxide equivalents, okay? But more than 50% of the emissions on arable farms will come from the artificial fertilizers that are used and applied. The next biggest area is use of fuels and field operations. And by field operations, we mean the impact of those field operations as well as the capital embedded in the machinery that's being used for those field operations. By comparison, if you look on the right-hand side of the screen, you look at ruminant livestock farm, it's about 50, I think it's 55%, oh sorry, 50%, it is literally half, it doesn't quite look like that on my pie chart. Half of the emissions are in the form of methane, and that's coming primarily from ruminant livestock. And if you remember earlier, I said that overall 11% of UK emissions come from agriculture. That does vary quite a lot from county to county. I live in Devon, and in Devon, the overall contribution of agriculture to UK, or to Devon's emissions is much higher than 11%, but that's primarily because we've got a lot of livestock in Devon. So you can see for ruminant livestock farms, we're talking about methane and manure contributing, getting on for 75% of total emissions. And then you can also see imported feedstuffs there at 10%. So there's a lot to go at in terms of where those feedstuffs come from. Next slide, please, Tom. Okay, just move on. So what I want to talk about now is really how our calculator will be deployed. So if you look at the next slide, please, Tom. Okay, I spend a lot of my time talking at events, talking to farmers groups, and the first thing we always say is actually needing to baseline where you're starting from to know where you're at the moment. Because if you don't know where you're at, you don't necessarily know where your hotspots are, indeed how hot they are. And that's really important to be able to start to think about where do we need to look to reduce our emissions. And certainly our calculator will do that very clearly for you. It will highlight where the hotspots are, where you're doing well. It will also highlight how much carbon you're currently storing, depending on the information you put into the calculator. And I think probably the most important thing we find is that over time, because we don't just provide a number and leave the farmer to work out what on earth it all means, we're actually there to help farmers to understand what it all means and to think about how best to take action. And from that point of view, it's really important that it isn't just an exercise in coming up with a number. It's so what? You know, what am I going to do about it? And as I said earlier, very often reducing emissions makes sense for the business. And we can talk about that later if we've got time. Can you move on, please, Tom? Thank you. So this just gives you on the right-hand side a summary of what the reports that we'll be producing within this project will look like. This is a summary report from an example farm, so don't worry too much about the numbers. But effectively, we ask you to input information about all the sources of emissions on your farm. And once they're all added together, that will constitute the blue column, which is on the left-hand side of the graph. We also ask you for information on hedges, trees, and the level of soil carbon that you're storing in your soils where you've got that. We also include information from relevant countryside stewardship options for England. And that all that comes together to provide that green bar on the level of sequestration that your farm has done over the last 12 months. And then we simply take one from the other to give you the funny lime green column, which tells you what your balance is. And just so, you know, really just to put this into context, we see all sorts of numbers in terms of that balance. We do have businesses where that lime green bar is positive, where they are storing more carbon than they're emitting. So it is possible, although I have to say that it's quite unusual. And it does generally rely on the volume of carbon being stored in soils. And I've just on the left-hand side of the screen given you some information about our calculator. Calculators, and I know that you'll all be sitting there thinking, well, they're all different. They all give me a different answer. So why should I bother? My riposte to that is, yes, you're kind of right. Although increasingly we are all aligning behind a required way of doing these things, a required protocol. And all the time, those protocols are becoming more precise. But the great thing that this project will do is allow farmers to account for soil carbon sequestration. And that information comes from a research project which we've been involved in for the last 5 years. And our calculator, once you've done your first report, you can go back to that report the next year, or indeed whenever you want to input information that's different, so you don't have to start all over again. We also provide you with the ability to do what-if scenario planning, and very increasingly now farmers are baselining themselves and then using the calculator to do their what-if planning to see what they would have to do to get to net zero. Okay, next slide, please, Tom. Okay, so this is what we're doing in this project. We're involved in quite a number of the work packages within the NCS project, and our role is to provide, firstly, a baseline for all the farmers who are involved in the project trials. So we know where they're starting from before they start to implement changes in practice. But alongside that as well, we want to improve how our calculator deals with farmers who are growing and feeding pulses and legumes within their business. And this project will do a lot of research that will enable us to improve the accuracy of footprinting in these areas. And for us, that's really brilliant. I mean, obviously, that information will be available to all calculators, but all the time, we're very much committed to wanting to be able to, as accurately as possible, measure farmers' greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, thank you. If you'd like to move on to the next slide. Now, I have to come clean here. I wasn't here at 2 o'clock, so I don't know whether Roger has covered this. So apologies if he has, but certainly we're looking very closely at the overall targets for this project in terms of emissions reductions. And you can see here sort of laid out fairly clearly the key targets in terms of those emissions reductions in the areas of reductions in requirement and usage of artificial nitrogen fertilizers because of growing peas and legumes. Secondly, their use within animal feedstuffs in the UK to replace imported soya. And thirdly, that delivery of a residual nitrogen benefit from the legumes to the next crop, which can reduce the requirement for artificial fertilizer for the next crop. And I think that's really quite important. And just to respond to a question in the chat earlier about should we not also be focusing on the need to reduce the amount of feeds fed to livestock, I fully appreciate that requirement. And within this project, we're not only looking at dry feeds, we're also looking at the potential for growing mixed crops of forages for livestock, which will have the same impact of reducing the requirement for those sort of cereal type feeds. Tom, if you could move on, please. I think we're getting to the end of my slides. Yeah, I just wanted to share this with you because it gives you a sense, and I don't know how many of you would have seen this before, but it just gives you an idea of the kind of emissions that are associated with different inputs. I'm not going to go through them. I just sort of leave them there for you to look at and think about. Perhaps on the sequestration, but the one that is talked about a lot, but it is hugely significant, is the potential for increasing soil organic matter by 0.1% per year, of locking up nearly 9 tons of carbon per hectare. And that is hugely significant. And it's one of the reasons why so many of us talk about agriculture as being part of the solution, not the problem. I think that's the end, but just move on, Tom, to, yeah, it is. So I'm really excited, or the whole of Farm Carbon Toolkit is really pleased that this project is now underway, because there's so much that we can do together with farmers to make this something that's positive for farmers and for the UK. Thank you, Tom.
Great, thank you very much for that, Liz. No, that was a super presentation. Just to reiterate, all of those who have joined the Pulsepep, all those farmers who have joined the Pulsepep will get help and assistance measuring their farm carbon toolkit, their farm carbon through the Farm Carbon Toolkit. So, and we'll be in touch with all of you as we go on about how to do that. So. I'm thrilled that we've got both David Passmore, who's an Oxfordshire farmer, and Andy Howard, who have joined us on the webinar. So if I don't know, David, whether I know that you had David's just come down from the Lake District. So yes, he's there. Fantastic. And do we have Andy as well? Is Andy there as well? I can't see Andy, but that just might be problems with my screen. Are you there, Andy? He was here a while ago. Maybe we've lost Andrew. Oh, that's a shame. Not to worry. David, can we hear you all right?
Can you? Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. That's wonderful. So thank you very much for joining, David. Now, now I know I've been to your farm, and I have to say, it's a stunning farm. Could you just give us a little bit of an introduction to your farm and what you do there?
The farm is about 15 miles south of Oxford on the lower end of the Chilterns. It's mostly, well, it's all grade 3 soil over chalk or gravel. And what's particularly unusual what we're doing is we're still farming in a traditional sort of ley system farming. So we're undersowing every year an area of new lays of grass and clover into spring barley, and then they're then set for 3 years, grazed by cattle and sheep, then returning to an arable crop, and then sort of 5, 6, 7 years arable cropping. We've been doing that for generations here. It's sort of how you used to have to farm. If you go back to the 50s and 60s, by sort of 20 years ago, it looked like you were behind the curve. And now you can really see what it does for a farm, in that people come around your farm and go, wow, your crops look amazing. And you haven't got any black grass. It's sort of, which is mixed farming. So yeah, and that's what we're doing, going good crops, good animals on some pretty average ground. So yeah.
That's great. It looks as though Andrew's joined us as well. Andrew, you're on mute at the moment. Are you there? Can you hear us all right?
Yeah, sorry, I seem to cut out for the last 5 minutes.
No, not at all. It's great that you could join us, Andrew. Would you like to just give us a brief introduction to your farm?
Yeah, so we are a family farm, 300 hectares in Kent. I farm with my parents on various different soils, growing lots of different crops. We're no-till, we do intercropping, companion cropping, whatever other label you want to put on it. In terms of crops, we grow wheat, winter beans, spring beans mixed with oilseed rape, lentils and camelina. I've got linseed. We grow 3 different types of herbage seed. So we've got a wide rotation. I also did a Nuffield scholarship 7 years ago on companion cropping and intercropping.
Well, that was one thing I was going to ask you about, Andrew, because I know I've been to your farm and I've seen some of the exciting trials that you've been doing into intercropping. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that? Both about the your experience in intercropping and some of the trials work that you've been doing.
So I guess the first intercropping is growing 2 crash crops together. The first one I did was about 2016. Oh no, actually about 2014-15. We grew peas and oilseed rape together, and that worked quite well for a year or 2. And then growing spring oilseed rape isn't easy. And getting the peas to not mature too early also wasn't very easy. So from there, I think it was probably 2017, I tried spring beans with spring oats. The idea of that was to help weed control in spring beans. And also spring beans with us can be very hit and miss. With the hot weather like we've got now, they can be brilliant or they can be awful. So adding a sort of a risk management, adding the oats into that. So I did that 1 year and it worked. And then I think it's about the same time that PGRO were interested in intercropping. Roger and Rickers on the call and Steve Belcher came, sat on the farm, and for about 3 years we did different trials on peas and oats and beans and oats. We tried different seed rates of both. With and without, mixed rows, strip cropping, lots of different ideas of how it works. And I think Roger can correct me, but I think a lot of the results are actually on their website if anyone's interested. But for us, what came out from that was that peas and oats didn't work very well because the oats were still very green when the peas were ready to harvest. So we haven't done peas and oats at all since then. Beans and oats did work well. In 1 year, we did get a £200 a hectare increase in gross margin, but that's not necessarily every year. I now do peas and spring oilseed beans, and spring oilseed rape. And the reason I'm doing that is because on some fields we had wild oats. So if you do beans and oats together, you can't control the wild oats. So it also depends on your weed spectrum at the same time. But it does work very well, and we separate ours on farm. We find there's less disease. I haven't found one yet that we've done field scale after a trial or two. We haven't been better off. Not necessarily making lots of money, but not losing lots of money. And what other trials have we been doing? But now we grow lentils and camelina. So another thing from my Nuffield is Hodmedods, who are a company in Norfolk, sort of got in contact, and we started growing more niche pulse crops for them. So the one we've done for about the last 5 years has been lentils. If anyone thinks peas go flat, well then lentils are another subject completely. They really do go flat. So the first year we tried them.
Oh, Andy, we've lost your audio. Sorry,
someone's trying to ring me. Sorry, it muted itself. Then linseed and oats worked okay. And then from then on, last 2 years we're doing linseed and camelina, which are two very high value crops. Can you still hear me, Tom?
Yep, no, we can still hear you.
Sorry, my screen's frozen with me. It's fine.
Well, I was going to ask, sorry, Andy, sorry to interrupt. I was going to just ask David. I know that you've had quite a lot of experience with pulse crops yourself, David. Do you want to just tell us a bit about the crops that you've been growing?
Yeah, we grow peas every year. We're actually seed crop, but that's not really relevant because the seed's got to come from somewhere. But we're growing peas, beans less regularly because it's quite a dry farm over chalk and gravel. So there aren't many places, it's not that best suited. But we've been involved in the PN, and I've worked quite closely with Keith Costello, who's sort of Mr. P-Man, I think, with the PEN, sort of questioning, trying to work out. His big question is why pea yields are almost less than 40 years ago. Cereal yields are the same as 20 years ago, but more than 40 years ago. There's a lot of yield stagnation, but why peas are particularly hit, and we sort of come up with various theories. But each year there are one or two stunning pea crops around. You look at the PN, a couple of years ago, it was 1.7 tonne a hectare. Well, if people could start achieving that some of the time, but it suddenly becomes a good crop. And what we find peas are less variable because of the moisture requirement. But having said that, these hot spells, they do shut down quickly. We've had some super lucky crops. As soon as it goes to the mid-30s in central southern England, which is where we are, they can shut down quite quickly. But it's, trying to reduce some of the variability, understand some of that. And the factors of why the yields have stagnated. So, because when they're right, they're a brilliant crop. Super crop of beans is an absolute. Last year we had some winter beans, close to 6 tonne a hectare, and an absolute pleasure. Then the next year you are off. It's sort of Well,
this is exactly what we are looking to find out with this project. In terms of this is just one of the priorities that we may have for this is how to improve the consistency of crops. But I wanted to ask you, David, what are you hoping to get out of this project?
A sort of better understanding of variability, what that is. Is it avoidable because it's the way we're planting it? I know Keith was saying you go to some estates you dealt with for years, achieving good yields, then the farm manager changes and the yields go down, even though he doesn't really sort of acknowledge it. And they're not climate factors, I think. There's a lot of that, what are the factors driving that? And also better use. If there's good demand, there's a couple of big pig operations around here and now using beans. If that becomes almost an essential part of their diet, and help drive the market. So, rather than us having to export, more are used here, and we're not importing soya. Some of that may be driven by the consumer as well, which it is in some other industries of cutting down carbon footprint.
Yeah.
A good way of encouraging people to grow something is price going up. And if it goes up relative to wheat, peas and beans will be more factored into people's equations, won't they? You know,
yeah. Indeed, Andy, I want to ask you the same question. I mean, you know, granted that we have, you may not have heard all that much about the NCS project yet, apart from what you've heard about on the webinar today. But what are you hoping this project is going to deliver for you and for your business?
I guess it's the stability of yield. I agree with. We used to grow marrowfat peas for 3 years, and the first year they were brilliant, so we grew them again, and the next 2 years they were a disaster. We didn't do anything different, but they were just an absolute disaster. So I guess it's trying to drill down into that, and I'm also quite interested in the human consumption of these beans, which will also increase the market share. I mean, not last year, the year before, we grew faba beans, which Hodmedod's turned into a snack, which sort of replaced peanuts. I don't know, anyone who went to Groundswell would have tasted them because they were in your bag last year. I think there's a lot of scope, not just in the feed market, but also in the human consumption market, because the feed market with avian flu, swine flu, you know, that's quite under pressure. If we can get a higher proportion of our pulses going into the human consumption, I think that, I don't think there's much reason why they can't. I think it's quite an interesting side of it. It just needs a bit of imagination.
No, I agree. Well, in fact, anyone who visited the PGRO stand or the Boffin Haven of Inspiration at Cereals will have had the opportunity to take away a special packet of Hodmedod's. They're not actually the beans, Andy, they're the yellow peas. But we'll have to see if we can get hold of the bean snacks and perhaps make that available at Groundswell. And that'll be available if we manage to do it. That'll be available on the MacArthur Agriculture stand. Now shortly, I don't know, I'm just going to find out from Sky whether, do we have a, right, we've got it, and it needs to be entered into the thing, does it, into the chat? Could you, can I ask you to do that on here? So sorry about that. Sky is just going to put into the chat now a link for the site to go to now, where we're going to continue to have a discussion and draw your views. What we're looking for are your pulses of brilliance. So these are your ideas for how we take this project forward. And the reason we've got to go to a different area on Zoom is so that we can break out into breakout rooms. Please do stay with us, and there will also be your opportunity to direct some questions at the panelists as well. We've got your questions captured in the Q&A, so if you put a question in there and it doesn't get addressed, don't worry, we have captured it, and that will all be fed in, and hopefully we'll come back to you with a response as well. We've also captured all of the chat, so we've got all of your comments that you put in there. Thank you very much for those of you who have contributed into that. So I'm now, hopefully, have you got send it to everyone, all?
Yeah.
God. Bloody technology. Right. What's the will you, if you just excuse us, what's the address? Oh, you've sent it in the email, haven't you? The technology is defeating us. Sorry, bear with us.
Ready.
Right. To everyone. Great. Hopefully you've now received the link to go to for the Zoom meeting. If you can click on that, and then that will take you through. Does that give you a registration page, and then you have to take
it should go straight through.
Go straight to the meeting. Wonderful. Okay, right. Well, I'm going to sign off now from this. Thank you very much to all of our speakers, and to David and Andrew as well, for sharing their experiences. I hope that we'll see each other in a minute on the meeting. Hopefully you will see the thing in the chat right now. I'm going to leave this open for a little bit longer, although we'll switch off all cameras. So that those people can click on the chat. If you go into the chat, you should be able to see it. Click on the link and join the meeting. Please do join us there, because we really do want your pulses of brilliance. Thank you, all of you, for joining this webinar, and we will keep you informed about what's going on the NCS project for the 4 years that we are doing this. And we very much look forward to your involvement. So thank you again, and have a good afternoon.
Don't go off it yet.
No.
You have to wait till everyone's good.
Yeah.
Hi, David.
Is that up and running? Sorry, I think I was on mute.
I think so, David.
Yeah,
but
I'm not quite sure how we've been redirected around.
there's 15 people apparently in this group,
Okay.
and but I'm pretty certain we can't see anybody other than the 3 of us. So I think it's going to be a matter of people who want to say something, and there are 12 of you there. Oh, 11 of you. Oh, 10 of you. Oh dear, oh dear. Putting a question in the chat, and then, or just put something in the chat and we'll respond to it. I think that's probably the best way to proceed, I think.
Can you see the couple of answers I've just put in?
I can't see anything in here because there's a new chat, David.
Oh, okay, it's on the end of it. There was 2, I think they were from you, or the first one, what do we want to see? Was that, and they've all fallen off, haven't they?
They've gone, you see, that's the trouble, because it's like a new meeting.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've got some more questions on here. 1 minute.
Oh, no, Tom. That's all right, Tom.
Yeah,
we need guidance.
People to go to the new room. People will hopefully be waiting there. Unfortunately, I can't start the new session until I end this one. Have you got the link? Can you see it in the chat there, Liz?
Well, I thought I
was looking on emails. Okay, I've got it here.
No. Well, actually, you can't see it now because I think we are in another room. I clicked leave this one to join another one, and this is where I ended up. So I can go back to that again.